Hi, everybody, and welcome to our language acquisition panel. My name is Tu Duong, and I'm the general manager here at Boom Learning. I'm joined by Stephanie Claros. Stephanie, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Stephanie Claros, a former ESL and English and social studies teacher, and now I'm the project manager at Boom Learning.
And we're thrilled to have Stephanie here. She just started less than a month ago, and here she is co-hosting a webinar. We throw them in the deep end here. We're very excited to be discussing how to use Boom cards for English as a second language and English language learning students. This is actually a very near and dear to my heart as an ESL student myself. I didn't speak any English when my family came here from Vietnam, and I know all too well what it's like to struggle at school when you're faced with a language barrier. So I'm very happy to be hosting this panel. Before we start, we'd love to get to know you. We're going to be sharing a poll. You're going to see it pop up. Please go ahead and fill out the poll. And while you're doing that, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about, the format of the webinar. We're going to be recording this, so not to worry if you miss anything, you'll be able to see it on our YouTube channel. We're also live streaming it on our Facebook page. And in fact, if you go to the chat box right now, you're going to see some links to all that social media that I just told you about. I'll post it again just to make sure. Oops, Stephanie might need to post it again for you as I loved it. Anyway, feel free to drop your comments in the post in the chat box. We'd love to know more about, if you're an ESL, ENL, or ELL teacher, what challenges you face, any great experiences you've had with Boom cards and your students. Post it in the chat. Love to hear about that. If you see the Q&A box below, that's where we'd love for you to post your questions. We'll be answering your questions while the webinar goes on, and we'll also save some of questions for the live Q&A at the end. If you do post your questions there, you'll also be able to see everybody else's questions and answers to their questions. We are offering certificates of attendance for all the events during the symposium. To get a certificate, you'll need to fill out a form that'll be provided in the follow-up email. And you'll need to answer a few questions to confirm that you actually attended the webinar. And they can be tricksy, so please pay attention. So let's see what our poll results have brought up. So a fair amount of attendees are specialized in general education, some in special ed, 30% in speech therapy. Fantastic. Most of you are teaching in elementary school. But while most are joining from the US, I have some from Asia, some from Europe. Welcome, everybody. It's so exciting to have you here. That's fantastic news. Again, put in the chat where you're joining from. We'd love to know a little bit more about you. So now I'd like to turn it over to Stephanie. She's going to start us off with our amazing panel today.
Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Stephanie Claros. I'm a project manager here at Boom and a former teacher, and I still teach tutoring and test prep and academics. Fun stuff to stay in touch with my kids. But I wanted to just thank Trisha and Anna and Jadah for being here today. We really appreciate you guys. It's been fun working with you. And I just wanted to start it off by asking if you can introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you teach, who your student population is, and what made you interested in teaching ESL or ENL or language acquisition. So I think I'll start with Jadah, if that's okay. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Jadah Rivera. I am currently a teacher. I taught bilingual English, Spanish to first, second, and fourth grade students. I originally got involved in ESL because the program that we have in Texas, it was specifically at my school was an 80-20 program. So we would teach 80% of the day in Spanish, the other 20% in English. And doing that, I realized how important it is to have a very strong hour-long class for my students teaching ESL. And yeah, that's how I got involved in, with different activities and finding things that were going to be very helpful for my students.
That's great. That's awesome. Trisha, do you want to go ahead next?
Hi. I think my microphone is on.
Yes, you're on.
My name is Trisha Hyde, and I currently live in Florida. I taught first grade for 14 years. The majority of the time I taught an ELD classroom or ESL classroom. I also taught adults at the local community college, English as a second language. And I grew up in Arizona and have always had kids in my classes as a child that were learning English as a second language. And the Arizona State schools all make all of the teachers become certified in teaching English as a second language. So that's kind of where my interest started. But as I grew as a teacher, I realized that the strategies that they taught us are just good teaching strategies.
Very true. Thank you so much. I'm in the same boat. I was an English humanities teacher that I had to be ESL because my population was, so great, and the need was so great. So, and in Texas. So, Anna, do you want to introduce yourself to us again?
Sure. Hi, I'm Anna Scaramella. I am originally from Brazil, so English is my second language. I got into I teach ENL or ESL or ELL. The acronyms keep changing, but I teach English to students whose first language is not English. I work with a very big Brazilian population, so most of my students are Brazilian, and I am really in the school that I really wanted to be in. My interest in teaching ENL, ESL came because I wanted to learn English, and English I have always been obsessed with the language for some reason, and always been very interested in learning, and then that interest translated into teaching. I worked with adults at my local community college, and right now I'm teaching kindergarten through second grade. And that's it.
Well, that excuse me, leads us into our next question, and that is, there are so many different acronyms for these language acquisition programs and students, and sometimes we interchange them. Would any of you be able to speak on, let's start, maybe Trisha, if you could speak on this. Can you explain some of the acronyms and how they differ?
So the three acronyms that I have used the most are ELL, which basically generally describes students that are learning English, grade school students that are learning English. ESL, English as a second language, and I use that mostly, that's like teaching approaches. I use that for the term for when I'm teaching adults that are learning English as a second language. And then the newest acronym that I have been exposed to is ELD, which is English Language Development. And I couldn't give you a good definition of how that differs from the other two, other than we're helping all learners develop their English.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's going to just lead me over to Anna. Can you explain your ENL status?
I honestly don't think that they differ. I think it's just a new acronym to describe. For me, ENL is, English as a new language. So I'm teaching students whose English is not their first language. I also used ESL, which is English as a second language. When I was teaching back in Brazil, it was EFL, English as a foreign language. I think the acronyms change, but the techniques and the way of teaching remains the same, that the goal is the same.
Super. And Jadah, do you have anything to add to that? Got another acronym?
No, I mean,
Okay.
I've only used ESL and ELL, and they're just kind of used at the same time. They, people either use one or the other. So
Very good. Okay, thank you so much.
Yep.
So how do you identify students who need help learning English? Like, what are some of the signs to look for, let's say preemptively, before they enter a program? Do you want to start? Anna, do you want to start?
Sure. In my district, they go through an interview, an oral interview. It's not done in the building, it's done at the Board of Ed. So the head of the ELL department does an oral interview, and she identifies, if it's a young child, they're looking if they can point to an object, if they can answer a question in English, because we're now looking at whether or not they can read and write. If it's an older student, then they're going to be they're going to have to show knowledge in reading and writing as well. Other than that, there is a state exam that's called a NICETEL in New York, that they take the NICETEL, and depending on what they score, it determines whether they're in ENL or not, and it determines at what level they have to be serviced at.
Great, thank you so much. Trisha, do you want to add to that? The question was, how do you really identify students that need help learning English, or what kind of signs might you look for?
Typically when they register for school, either the first time as a kindergartner, or if they're moving to a new school, they fill out a language survey. The parents do. They fill out a language survey. So that's usually your first clue that if they indicate that there's another language other than English spoken at home, then we know that we need to move on to do some additional screening to see if they need to be in the ESL program.
Thank you. And Jadah, what do you think? Thoughts about?
We have, well, at the schools that I worked at, they usually have the students take a test at the beginning of the year. We have a program, there's 2 tests that we take. But the one that I know that the students really get on, and they can also do activities on, I don't know if they've had this in any of the other districts, but it's called MyOn. So they'll get on and they take a test to see what their level is in English. Usually if the kids are trying to move from a bilingual to ESL, then you kind of start from there and you determine what their level is. But yeah, that's usually what they do. Also, we were talking about the survey that they do, but usually they ask the parents right when they come in if the children speak the language at home. So that is another way where they kind of determine whether the child should be either placed in bilingual classes or be in general ed / ESL classes.
Super, thank you for that explanation. Okay, our next question is, what challenges have you faced while teaching this group of students? And Jadah, if you don't mind, if I can start with you again, and sort of a sub question is, are your ELL students in the same classroom or ESL students as your other students, or are they separate? Are you in a pull-out program? If you could just help us understand that.
Sure. A lot of, well, let me just say my first couple of years, everybody was together, but everybody was in a bilingual classroom, which was the majority Spanish speaking. And then I would just go from Spanish to English. The last 2 years have been where I've had a mix of the general ed students, like ESL students, and also kids transitioning from bilingual classes into ESL. And that's been kind of challenging because you see like a range of, different levels of English. So there's been a lot of scaffolding having to be done in the classrooms, making sure that, I'm picking out vocabulary before we do different assignments, reading assignments, and just asking questions to make sure everybody kind of is on the same level as far as understanding what's being read. Can you tell me what the first part of the question was again?
Yeah, it was, what challenges do you face when teaching this group of students? What are some of your biggest challenges?
Yeah, this just the biggest challenges have been just to make sure that everybody is kind of on the same learning plane as far as understanding what is being taught, and just making sure I have materials and I've prepared well for the lesson, for the vocabulary, for asking questions, and making sure that everybody has just a general understanding, even the students that are just learning English, making sure that they have a grasp of what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, moving on. We'll just move on from this. What challenge, or I'm sorry, what solutions have worked most for you regarding teaching your ESL students? Anna, do you want to answer this one? You can kind of let us know where your students are as well, if they're in class with you, or how you work with them physically.
Well, the recommendation is if they are beginners, they are to be polled. So I have a small classroom where I poll kids in small groups, which honestly I prefer to pull them out rather than pushing into a classroom. But depending on how many hours they need a week, I can co-teach with the classroom teacher, which works if students have a good grasp of oral language. I feel like part of the question was what solutions have worked for you using images. I feel like in an ELL classroom, images are very, very important. And I think maybe that's part of why I love using boom cards, because the way that I create my decks, they're very image heavy, because my students, especially my littlest ones, my students need to make the connection between what they know in their home language and what they're learning. So using images for me is very important in the classroom.
And I'm sure for all of you, and that really leads us right into our next question, which is, how do you use boom cards to support your ESL students? And Anna, if you want to just continue your thought. Sure. and answer that, and then we'll move to Jadah and then Trisha.
Sure. My favorite way to use boom cards is as a whole group. I do have them, because I mostly work with small groups, I make even smaller groups. And I assign different decks. I love that, it's possible to differentiate. I can add sounds. I also assign them as home practice. I don't like to call it homework, because I don't want them, although it doesn't feel like they're working. I think it's the best way to trick your students into thinking that they're playing a game, but they're actually practicing what you want them to practice. So I do use them a lot as a whole class, and the kids, I use boom cards sometimes as rewards. If you guys do this, we can play, and they ask for it. I like to use them as centers. I can go on and on. I'll talk too much if I keep going. And at home parents appreciate it too, because it's very easy to access them at home. It doesn't take too much to learn. It's not a lot to learn in order to access them at home.
Super, thank you. And Jadah, do you want to follow up with how you use boom cards to support your kids?
I feel like I use it pretty much the same way. I use it after I've taught a lesson. Sometimes I use it even during the lesson when I'm teaching, just because, like Anna was saying, the visuals are always great. And then it also makes it fun. Students can go up, if you make it interactive, they can kind of move the words all over the place. So that's really fun for them as well. And you want them to stay engaged. I do also use it for homework, for work they can, do to practice letter sounds. And then also with just for audio, also that helps if they can re-listen to everything that they've learned in class. I think that's also really helpful. And it makes the learning fun for the kids. So yeah.
Super, thank you. And Trisha, how do you use boom cards primarily to support your students in ESL?
I use the boom cards to for kids to have practice, independent practice with the lesson. Sometimes I also use them whole group. We use it like as a reinforcement. But they can do them independently while I'm pulling small groups, because I've added audio to them and I have directions, and I have directions on every slide. So if they forget what they're supposed to do, and I'm very clear with my articulation when I'm saying words. Like for instance, you can see my little slide here, that one's counting the syllables. So I say the word of the object, because even though they may know it in their native language, they may not know it in English. So I'm repeating it very articulate so that they can hear it clearly and be successful. But even on like my math boom cards, I have directions on every slide, because even though I've told them in English what they're going to do, they have, they need to process and the English to their native language so that they can understand what I am saying. And by the time they get to the boom cards or their center, they may have forgotten. So the directions are there to repeat to them so that they can be successful.
Okay.
I just want to interject that's so important, Trisha, what Trisha just said, that, if you're learning math and you don't quite understand English, I think one of the things that you can use in your boom cards is audio. You can add a recording of your own voice reading the instructions, or you could do that in the student's native language if you speak it. So they can actually learn math and not worry about learning English before they learn math or that particular math lesson. That was something that I obviously faced as an ESL student. Like my first challenge was if I was learning science or something, I couldn't even understand English first, much less the science. So removing that barrier, that obstacle of first having to understand what's being asked of you simply because you don't understand the language that's being spoken is huge. And I would love it. I know it's awkward. If you could, move a little bit more to the side, Trisha, so you can show us how cool your boom card is and how engaging and colorful it is for students. It really invites them to play the activity. I love that.
So I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to Tu, and she'll finish out the questions for today. Thanks, you guys, for those awesome answers so far.
Thank you.
I actually wouldn't mind if, we kind of followed up on that. I mean, what is it about boom cards that really help you when you're teaching ESL students? What features do you like to have in your boom cards that really aid in this situation, Jadah? And feel free, if you want, to share your screen and show your boom cards.
Okay. I mean, my biggest, for me, I really like where you can drag and drop. I love that, because if you have that on a large screen, the students can participate more. They think it's fun. That's probably my favorite feature on there. Another one is going to be, I'm going to share my screen. I love how you can include graphics and you can make them as large or as small as you would like. I think that also helps with just the, so students remember what the vocabulary is that you've gone over. The audio, which you can attach to any screen, and it can, go over vocabulary that's really important. On my cards,
share that audio?
Sure, for sure.
Oh, sorry. I think you.
Can you hear?
Yeah,
it?
I think you have to click share sound when you share.
Oh yeah,
screen.
that's right. I forgot. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Let's see.
So as you can see, almost in this boom card that you have, Jadah, this is also something that a lot of world language teachers could also use.
Yes,
Something similar, not just ESL or ELL educators, but teachers who want to teach Spanish or French or any foreign language.
correct. So for this one, it's, and I've had the sound on, let me know if you can't hear it.
Clothing.
So they,
Clothing.
so I say the word twice and they can listen to the word and it has the picture right next to it. So they would be able to hear the word and go over the vocabulary that way. For this one, I also like how you can type the word so you can practice. You can practice how the word is spelled, and that's really important when you're learning a new language. And you can just go over these as much as you like. I feel like it also helps the students become more independent when they are trying to learn a language, because it's great when you can teach a language, but I also think it's important that students kind of take control over what they're learning and what they would like to practice. So.
Fantastic. Anna, I see a really cool boom card in your background. It looks like a game.
It is, yeah. It's one of my favorite ones that I've made so far. And one of the things that I say about, I think your question was, what is it about boom cards, right? Technology is not going anywhere. I think that technology is here to stay in education. It's, kids are immersed in technology. And if we as teachers use that to our advantage in a way that students can use the technology that they love to use, in an educational way. And I think that's what boom cards provide for us. I created this one. My screen is in mirror, whatever. So I moved to the left. It looks like I'm going to the right.
I know.
So this is a deck to practice sight words. It's in Flow Magic. This is one of the decks that I think I showed it on Tuesday, maybe. But each sight word has 9 tasks. And so there's, like Jadah said, like to type the word, they can type the word, they can read the word. I recorded, you can see over here on the side, the little sound icon. So I recorded the directions, I recorded each sight word. So each card has a different direction, it's the same sight word, 9 tasks, but each card has a different task for them to complete. So I recorded the directions, and there's plenty of visuals for them to identify. And there's so much that you can practice, especially for ENL students. Listening comprehension is one of the things that kids struggle the most with, is understanding. And even people that study English, I remember when I first moved to the States, I could speak English fluently when I moved here, but I was terrified of speaking on the phone. For some reason, I could not understand a thing when I was talking on the phone. So practicing listening, is very, very important.
I wonder also if you need to see the person's mouth
Maybe
when you're talking to them.
I was terrified. I wouldn't order a pizza. That's how scared I was to talk on the phone.
That's hilarious. So tell me how the game works.
This game?
Yeah.
So I have a game counter. You can move it around the board. You choose a sight word. So I tell kids that they don't have to go in order. If they don't want to, they can. You click on the sight word. It's going to take you to the sight word main screen, where I have the sight word recorded, and I ask students to repeat it 3 times. I don't know, I feel like drilling is looked down upon, but that's how I learned English. I started learning English as a teenager. And most of my classes back in Brazil were repetition. So I make my students repeat quite often. So they repeat the word 3 times, then they have to type the word 3 times, then it's 9 tasks, and they practice each sight word in isolation and in context. So there's a sight word in just the sight word, and there's the sight word in sentences.
Gotcha.
And I think it's a great way to to repeat. I call it meaningful repetition because they're repeating, but they're repeating in different ways.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's really how I learned English too. You just need to hear it so many times. You need to say it so many times for it to be kind of ingrained in your brain and your muscle memory, how your mouth actually says the word. So
yes,
yeah,
that's very important. I always talk to my students, and I mean, during, you know, the pandemic that I had to cover my face, it made it, you know, that much trickier because they couldn't see my mouth. But I'm always telling them, this is how much my mouth opens. Look at my chin. It goes down. It goes halfway down. It goes all the way down, you know, because sometimes you need to visualize the sound in order to be able to produce it.
yeah. And this kind of brings me, I'm looking at the Q&A, and Luciana asked, can I use boom cards to help students improve their pronunciation?
I would say so. I would say so because, you know, they listen, and they can practice repeating those words. And it's great, even in the classroom, great practice in the classroom, you know, play the sound and have the students repeat the words. You know, I can see that that's a great thing. I'm thinking now, because I'm about to go back to my community college to teach a class to adults. So I can see like that being very useful for adults as well, because once you reach, I believe once you reach a certain age, it's hard to get rid of the vices that we create, you know? So having that, and they can take it home and not only wait for the teacher in the classroom, they can use it at home. And I think that would be very valuable.
Actually, in Vietnamese, there are like, I think 6 tones. And they say, I don't know if this is true, they say if you don't hear those tones in like the first 6 months of age or whatnot, you're not going to hear it. I don't know if I believe that, simply because I have friends who've taken Vietnamese lessons and as adults, and they've been able to really pronounce the words very well. I'm very impressed. But I do think boom cards, when you add audio with the pronunciation of the word, whether it be in English or a foreign language, that can really it models what the correct pronunciation is. And you can click it again and again, that repetitive nature you were talking about, Anna, to where you can hear it and like remember it.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Trisha, tell us about that boom card you have in the background.
So this is one of my reading comprehension for like kinder and first grade. And on this boom card, it's reading comprehension. You can see I used a real, sorry, I don't know which way to move so that you can see it, but I used real images for the stories, because all of the stories have a nonfiction tone to them. So I read this story out loud. And again, my articulation, but kids could go back and if they were at this level, they could reread the story because they hear me pronounce it correctly. But then there's a separate button that they can push, an audio button that actually will read each answer choice for them so that they can make their best selection. And one way that I use this in the classroom is that I put it up on we had smart boards, but I put it up on the board and I can play the audio so they can listen to it. If they didn't understand the story at all the first time, they could re-listen to it. They can listen to the answer choices so they can make their best choice. And whole group, one thing I would do, because this is just multiple choice. So one way I made it engaging is I had them all with their whiteboards. They had to secretly write their answer. They showed their answer, and then we could decide which was the best choice and why was that the best choice. So it's just a reading comprehension game.
That's fantastic, and I like that you go over the questions as a group with the entire classroom as well. You know, Trisha, I'm going to ask you this. You're retired now, but have you seen, you know, I'm sure you've seen broad changes in the approach to language support over the years. Can you describe what's available now as compared to what was available maybe 20 years ago?
I would say 20 years ago, we had kids just in general population classrooms, but we didn't necessarily, all teachers didn't know the good strategies for teaching students that English wasn't their first language. So they kind of got, I don't want to say pushed under the rug, but they didn't really get any of the supports that they needed unless they had a teacher who really understood. And then we moved to a model where we had all of the English language learners in one class. And it was a 4-hour language model. So we had them all day. Like I was a self-contained first grade teacher with all 28 English language learners for that grade level in my room. But we had a dedicated 4 hours a day of learning English. So we had a dedicated 30 minutes of just grammar, of teaching kids how to use adjectives correctly. We had a listening and speaking time where they may listen, they may repeat. So we were working on articulation. And honestly, that was my favorite model. Then we moved back to where we separated all the kids into general ed rooms. But now all the teachers were certified in teaching English as a second language, but everybody's place they are in teaching and their dedication to it is different. So we went back to the kind of like, let them use good teaching strategies, but we don't necessarily focus on those grammar and listening and speaking and all the things that the kids honestly need to move up in their levels, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Jadah, how about you? As a bilingual teacher, have you seen changes in the language supports, since you started teaching?
I'm gonna say yes. I'm gonna say that just because there are more activities and more resources that support bilingual students, so you're seeing more resources that are bilingual, that are actually bilingual, where at the beginning you may not have seen so many, which is nice because a lot of the resources now, they'll have the Spanish and they'll have English. So it'll kind of be like, it'll be divided. And so then students can read in English. And then if they're not sure about a word, they can look, at the bottom or look to the side and they'll find the word in English or vice versa. So yeah, you do see more resources. And I think that makes it more fun for you as a teacher. When you don't find anything, I think now you can actually make your own things, your own resources for your class, which is fun too, but it is time consuming. So I think it's nice to see more that are being done for students who are bilingual and you being able to share that with your class.
Yeah, I just want to let everyone know that if you go to our Boom store, if you go to our website, wow.boomlearning.com, and there's a store tab. So there's well over 400,000 Boom cards that you can already just buy. There's some free Boom cards there as well. But we have Boom cards that are written in native languages. So written in Spanish, for example, but it's teaching math, or written in Spanish and it's teaching science, or something like that. So there are resources within our Boom cards that you can access already that will help your ELL students, learn a subject, even if they don't really understand the language it's being instructed in.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I would love to hear can each of you share some of the wins you've experienced when, like an aha moment, when the kids just light up and finally get it when you're using Boom cards?
Can I go first?
Absolutely.
I think I have it as a background, which was, oh no, I don't have it. But I remember we were studying CVC words, and this little girl who I joined my current school in January, and she's a little Brazilian girl, and right away I noticed that she didn't. I wasn't sure, is it just language, because I could communicate with her in Portuguese, and she was still not getting. Turns out she was a year and a half ahead, so she was in first grade. She should have been like a young kindergartner. And so finally, she went back to kindergarten. They allowed her to go back to kindergarten because she was more than a year younger than she should be for first grade. And we were practicing CVC words. And this girl, when I tell you, she could not say hello in English. She didn't know what it was. And we, practice a lot of, in my school, the main focus is reading. I don't necessarily agree with it, but that's what the curriculum tells us to do. So we want to get the kids reading. And so we're talking about sounds and first sounds and this and letters and whatever. And I put my CVC, one of my CVC decks on my screen. And this girl with her little tiny fingers, she tapped every single sound. And we go like at, cat, and I was so happy. I was so happy. And that was, I think it was the first time that I was like, wow, I was able to get to her, and she's getting it. She's starting to grasp what we can do. And now she just finished first grade. So this was in kindergarten. She just finished first grade, and she is incredible. It's like she went to sleep one day, woke up speaking English. I don't know how that happened. Incredible.
That's wonderful to hear. Trisha, do you have a story of like just one of those light bulb moments you experienced with a student using boom cards?
So in my Arizona district, I was the reading specialist, and I did some pullout with students. And so I would assign them boom decks that they could work on in their classrooms. And one of my students, I can't tell you what the skill was, but they were working on a phonics skill. And then when they went to go work with their teacher was like, oh, can you spell this word? And she tapped it out and whatever. And he wrote it on the board. And he said, you know how I know this? Because Mrs. Hyde taught me on boom. So I like that story, because sometimes you think, are they really learning when they're playing boom? And they are.
Yeah, I think it's like boom learning. It basically turns activities into games, and it just makes it fun for students to learn. And I don't think half the times they feel like they're learning, or they're going through the boring motions of learning.
They get tricked.
So they get tricked.
Yeah.
Which is great, because it makes it fun for them and much easier for you, I would think, to actually increase engagement and excitement about the subject matter.
I had a
Jadah?
parent teacher I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to share. I had a parent teacher conference with one of my kids' teachers a while back. I think right after I started creating boom cards, and they were remote. And I said, "Have you heard of boom cards?" She says, "No." I said, "Oh, this is these digital test cards. They're great," and blah blah blah. Fast forward a few weeks, my daughter comes home. She goes, "I have homework." She was going to school twice a week and 3 days from home, and she opens her little Chromebook, and what is she doing? She's playing a game on boom cards, and she doesn't think she's working. She doesn't think that she's doing homework, because they're fun, they're colorful, they're engaging, interactive.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Jadah, do you have want to share one of those moments?
I think mine would be when I was a first grade student. I was working as a first grade teacher, and I had a first grade student who came to me, and he didn't know how to write his name, and he didn't know any of his alphabet sounds. So I worked with him all through the year up until March, and I would give him all different types of practice. We would do boom cards. We would do just work outside of boom cards, just at the beginning of the day where I would play the song. We would go over the letter sounds every day. And when I knew he had finally gotten all of his letter sounds was when he could do one of the activities by himself. And then he could recite the letters to me and the sounds. I knew it had helped a lot. So
That's fantastic. One thing I should let you know is we've got a new feature in development, and that is a new voice memo. So this is going to let students like record their own voice. And you know, you can within the platform. So while they're playing a boom card, they can answer with a recording. They can record their answer, and then you as their teacher can listen to their recordings and grade it if you want. So that's a new feature that's being developed, and I think it's going to be so incredibly valuable for ESL or ELL students, any student actually. But then you can really hear the pronunciation. They can, you know, if they're speaking sentences or something, you can judge whether or not they've got the grammar down. So I'm so excited for this new tool.
That's awesome.
Especially for you guys, but it's coming. I want to thank you all for joining us. I'm going to move it over to some Q&A, which has been waiting here. Luciana says, it's amazing, Anna's English skills. I'm wondering, what's the secret?
I don't know. Like I said, I've always been obsessed with English. You know, when sometimes you would read magazines to pass the time, I would read the dictionary, and very nerdy, but I've always loved English. It's always been my dream to live in the United States. And when I finally came here, you know, 15 years ago, I just think it's a beautiful language. I don't know what the secret is. I wish I had a better answer.
Well, I can't detect an accent whatsoever. So
and that is music to my ears.
If anything, I would say there might be a New York accent there.
Right? But you see, here's the funny thing. This is the way I talk. I love Southern accents. I think that they're so beautiful. I cannot talk like that. I wish I could. But yeah, it's music. I was like, you know, those teenagers with pictures on the wall. That was me. Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, and I wanted to sing their songs. And you know, finding lyrics wasn't as easy back then. But I would just I would write on paper the way I understood what they were saying, and I would practice and practice and practice and practice.
All right, I have another question here from Karen. Have you had ESL students who come to you from a family that it has a very unique language like Tagalog or Telugu? Telugu. I don't even know what country that speaks that language. So do you ever have you know, a language that you're not familiar with whatsoever?
Yes.
Oh, it's from India. Thank you, Karen.
Oh, I've
How do
had
you address
Chinese. At my previous school, I had a lot of Chinese kids, so I have no clue about Chinese. And I think that can you guys hear me? I think I'm getting some. I think that you address it the way you would address a student that speaks any other language. You know, it's you're going to use the strategies and the techniques that are for language learners, and it's impossible to know every single language in the world. You know, like when I have students that speak Portuguese and I can help them, I will, or Spanish, I will. But if it's a language, I had a student that spoke French. As much as I would love to speak French, I don't speak French. And I do resort to Google Translate sometimes when I absolutely cannot get the kid to understand. And I'll do whatever I have to do to help my kid understand what they need to understand.
That actually reminds me, I was volunteering in my daughter's second grade classroom, and there was a little boy that just moved from Colombia. He didn't speak any English. And the poor teacher, she didn't speak any Spanish. So she was literally using Google Translate on her phone to communicate with him. And I'm sorry, but it couldn't have, isolated him and segregated him and just called him out on his differences more. I knew she didn't know what to do, and this was the best solution she could come up with. But that poor boy just felt very isolated. And he would almost sit separately, and she would teach the rest of the class one thing, and then go to him and speak to him through Google Translate and give him maybe a Spanish worksheet. What would you do in this kind of situation? What would you advise to teachers like that who are, at a loss for what to do with new ESL or ELL students?
Any volunteers?
Jadah, what would you do?
In that situation, if I'm gonna think, if I didn't know the language, I would try and at least pick out words, and I would do this before I taught the language, pick out the main words and go over that before I gave the student the work, so that I would feel like they knew what I was talking about before I just kind of gave it to them without them having any background. Because I feel like background knowledge is very important before you give any student any activity. So I would pick out words that I thought were important, translate it into their language, and then I would go over exactly what we were going to do. And then at least maybe make it a group assignment so that we could all work together, and then they could, the student could at least start practicing English while writing it down. And so that you want them to feel included. You always want the kids to feel included when you're teaching. You want them to feel comfortable. You also want them to feel like they can talk to you and talk to their peers. And I feel like when you include them, when you're doing work in a class setting, that helps them feel like they're part of the classroom and if they're coming from a different country, you really want them to feel included and not left out. I feel like that's really important, because that's their first impression. That's their first impression of that's the school. So yeah.
I also think that I'm sorry, do we still have time?
Yeah.
I also think that in that situation, I think that the teacher, your daughter's teacher, did the best that she could.
Yeah.
And that's why I also feel like labeling your classroom is important.
Yeah.
When we have when we have one kid that speaks another language, I think it's easy to pick out vocabulary words, but if you have 7 different languages in the classroom, it's hard to expect that from the classroom teacher that also is responsible for 25 other kids. So I think that Google Translate it can be a very good tool. At my school, I can hear from my room that some teachers do use that. And I think that at the initial stage, it's important that they feel safe and comfortable and welcome. It's more important that they feel, positive about school than they understand, because they really won't. And kids will go through the silent stage where they're just not going to talk. And then one day it's going to click. So it's important to expose them to the language and try to bridge that gap. We have to activate the background knowledge. Like if they know what, like a phone is in their language, you can point to it and say phone, and then they learn a new word, But I do think that teachers are, it's not easy, because they do have to teach the rest of the class. If I had it my way, honestly, I think that ENL kids would stay with the ENL teacher all day, as opposed to just getting a few minutes a day. No, my beginner students, they require 2 periods a day. Each period is half an hour. So it's just an hour a day.
That's not a lot.
And many students, depending on where they've come from and the situation, why they have come, like I had lots of refugees and they can't read and write in their first language anyway. So me giving them a worksheet in their first language isn't going to help them because they still can't read and write it. And I had about 7 languages represented in my room at all times. So the things that benefit kids are, like you said, pictures. Like she said with the phone, like I would ask the kid in small group, like, tell me it in your language. And we would work out a system that they would know what I was asking. And then I would say in English and I would tell them the word and we would just practice, the articulation. We would like look in a book for it, so we start out with baby steps, but the most, the important part is that they feel safe and you build that relationship. Because some of them, if they're a refugee, they've already got childhood trauma because you don't become a refugee because, it's everything is
by choice
coming from. You become a refugee because something is happening. And so they've already got childhood trauma being brought to the United States. And now they're thrown in this room that they can't communicate with any person. So, there's lots of things to do to build those relationships.
I'm always asking them, how do you say this in your language? How do you say it's also important to show interest in who they are, where they come from, what they speak, and that, their language is still important. They're just adding English to what they can speak.
I have a couple more questions, but there's only 2 minutes left. Dara asked, does anyone have resources for teaching English, Spanish cognates for reading and vocabulary? Jadah, do you have any recommendations? I could also email Dara after I find some resources for her. Boom cards.
I am thinking of somebody, but I cannot think of their name right now. And they have really good cognate activities. And I was
Why don't
using
we
them.
get back to Why don't we get back to you, Dara? I have your email address. We'll get back to you. And Katie asked a really interesting question about voice memo and development. Are any chance video option for deaf and hard of hearing students that use American Sign Language? We don't have that yet, but we can add it onto the wish list for our future development. That's a great suggestion, Katie. So thank you, everyone. If you look in the chat, we've got a virtual social hour at 3:30. There's a link to it. There's also, you can find it on the Symposium schedule. We hope to see you there. Thank you so much, ladies. It's been a very eye-opening to have this panel discussion with you. So I hope to see you in the virtual social hour. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you to all of our
Bye.
panelists.
Thank you.